There's a town called Jonesboro. It's the setting of my novel, Me, Boo, and the Goob, A Southern Adventure. It's based on growing up in Jonesboro in a little neighborhood called Birdland. So if you like to laugh, get a glass of wine, kick back. We're going to go through some of the stories in the book, and then I'm going to tell you the backstory. So put your feet up and get ready to remember what it's like to be a kid. I'm Bill Garner, and this is the Empty Nest Barn.
I go straight from the bank, gassing up the tank, cranking up the radio, playing old Hank. It ain't that long till I'm back at the farm. I'm pulling up the truck down at the dock. It's time to do some cruising.
Me, Boo, and the Goob is a novel based in Jonesboro, Arkansas. It's about growing up in a little neighborhood called Birdland in the 1960s. It's a fun story, and most of the book is set actually in Birdland. However, the first story in the book, oddly enough, takes place down in Mississippi, a little town called Senatobia. My father was in the Army in the 1950s, and in 1957 he came back from Germany. He, my sister, Sweet Pea, and my mother all arrived in Senatobia, Mississippi in the last week of September. Well, I was born about a week into October. And so they bought an older house. It was a brick house. It was a nice house on a street. It was just down the street from a church. And about 3 years later, in 1960, in mid-December, my brother, the Goob, was born. And about a week later, it was Christmas. And so this first story is about what happened the day after Christmas. So I hope you'll enjoy it. It's all in the book. If you don't have the book, get the book. You're going to enjoy it. But kick back and get your glass of wine or beer or something. Put your feet up, because we're fixing to remember what it's like to be a kid. Alrighty, talk to y'all in a little bit.
It's a Saturday joyride. Percy Priest is the spot. We're on a boat.
Everybody always wants to hear the whole dang story about how I came into that car. Well, that's a long story, but before we get into it, there's some things you ought to know. First of all, despite what you may have been told, not everything in the story is my fault. Sometimes accidents just happen. You know how it is. It starts off pretty small, not real bad, but then no matter what you do, when you go to start trying to fix things, the situation just gets worse and worse. It can go from nothing to a dang disaster in no time at all. That's what happened a few years ago when I was just a little kid and our house down in Sweetwater burned down. I remember it like it was yesterday. Dad had bought this really, really, really old house because Mom liked it, and it was empty. It was so old that most of the house didn't have electricity or running water. Dad had an indoor bathroom put in right away, and he was having electricity put in the parts of the house that didn't already have it. They weren't quite finished doing that yet, so in the older parts of the house we still used candles and oil lamps. Well, on the day after Christmas, I was sitting in the parlor with my big sister, Sweet Pea. That's not her real name, but that's what Mom and Dad called her, so that's what everybody called her. She was sitting at her piano practicing Heart and Soul. I wasn't doing nothing but picking sock lint from between my toes and watching her play. She's going to be a big star one day. Last year on the 4th of July, they crowned her Little Miss Lady of the Lake over at Sardis Reservoir and set off a bunch of fireworks because she was the prettiest girl there. Mom has her learning how to dance ballet. If only she could sing, she could be on Ed Sullivan's TV show or maybe even Lawrence Welk's. Anyway, I was getting down to some serious lint picking when I got this big tickle in my nose. I let out a ginormous sneeze. It was so big it shook the whole house. When I sneezed, I kicked out with my foot just a little bit and accidentally kicked the leg of the end table that was beside the couch. The table banged up against the wall. This made this big old tall skinny candle on the table rock back and forth 3 or 4 times. Each time it rocked, it would pause just a second at the peak of the swing, and then it flopped back in the other way. Each time it swung, it got closer and closer to falling. Finally, it swung just a fuzz too far and it fell against the wall. It leaned against the wall for barely a half a second. The flame of that candle flicked up that old wallpaper just like a snake's tongue. Quicker than you can say Jack Sprat, I jumped and snatched up that candle. I blew it out. Whew! That was close, I thought. I almost set the house on fire. Well, the wallpaper on that wall was really, really old, so it was really, really, really dry. You had to look really, really, really close to see it, but there was something weird going on at the edge of the wallpaper. Apparently, that half second was all it took for that snake's tongue of flame to light that wallpaper on fire just a little tiny bit right there on the edge. It was lit just a little bit at the seam that had come loose between two pieces of wallpaper. There was just a little thin line glowing bright red. I watched it for a second as it slowly ate its way across the sliver of wallpaper. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. As the red line crept across the paper turned black as the red line got close. Then the red line ate the black wallpaper, and when it finished, the paper magically turned gray, and it looked like it was made out of ash. It was amazing. I looked over at Sweet Pea. She hadn't seen a thing. She was still staring at her sheet music and playing Heart and Soul. I looked back at the little red line eating the paper and thought, I'd better put a stop to this before that gets going. So I blew on it to blow it out. That was a mistake. That little red line didn't go out. It just got bright red, almost white, and it went woof. It wasn't a little red line anymore. Now it was a little fire. Sweet Pea must have heard it because she stopped playing and turned and looked at the fire, and then she looked at me, and then she said, "You set the house on fire?" "No," I hollered. "It was a candle." But she wasn't even listening. She hollered, "Miss Mary, the boy set the house on fire." And then she turned and looked at me saying, "You're going to get in trouble. You're going to get in trouble," in that sing-songy voice that girls do when they're trying to get you in trouble. There was just a little fire on the wallpaper there about the size of my finger. But I panicked. Things were starting to go downhill really fast, and I didn't know what to do. So I blew on the flame real hard to blow it out. That was another mistake. When I blew on it, the harder I blew, the hotter it burned, and the bigger the little flame got. All of a sudden, it was spreading like mad. I blinked twice, and half the wall was on fire. It spread so fast and so hard that it went woof, and this time I lost my eyebrows. It did it so hard that it shook all the air in the room. Quicker than a cat farts, the whole daggum wall was on fire, and it was spreading across the ceiling. The way the fire went across the ceiling reminded me of how cold syrup looks when you pour it out on a stack of pancakes. The fire was a blue and red syrup just spreading across the ceiling. It was amazing. The heat from the fire was burning my face, and the black smoke was making me cough, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Miss Mary, Mom's helper, must have smelled the smoke about the time she heard Sweet Pea call out. She came running in and saw the fire. Her eyes nearly jumped out of her head, and she started hollering, "Lordy, Lordy, this house is lit on fire. You babies get on out of here. Run, chillins, run." Sweet Pea started moving right away and saying, "You're going to get your butt beat. You're going to get your butt beat," in that damn sing-songy voice. But I just sat there looking at the fire. I was frozen, watching the syrup just kind of eat at the ceiling. Now, if you think Sweet Pea is bossy on a normal day, you ought to see her when the house is lit on fire. In just a few seconds, the fire burned a hole through the ceiling and was starting to spread into the room above the parlor. The ashes from the fire were swirling in the smoke-filled parlor like a blizzard of black and gray snow. Sweet Pea was not happy. She picked up her sheet music and got real bossy real fast. She grabbed me by the arm and started giving me orders as we headed out of the house. She mostly dragged me out because I couldn't take my eyes off the fire and the smoke and the snow. Miss Mary ran upstairs through that black smelly smoke to get Mom and the Goob. He was only a week old. She hustled Mom and the Goob out of the house before it fell in. The fire department came, but it was too late. The old house was gone.
Drinking Tennessee whiskey, a big the sky, we're going up.
Okay, so that's the story in the novel. The way I remember it, and remember, I was 2.5 years old. My sister and I were sitting in what was the parlor of the house, and there was a candle on the end table, and I knocked it over, and it caught that old wallpaper on fire, and it just went up. It went up like nobody's business, and I remember watching it go up the wall and across the ceiling. And then the next thing I remember is we're in the front yard, and the thing that struck me, stuck in my mind, was I remember a bald-headed fireman running across the front yard. The next thing I remember is we went back to the house after the fire and walked through what was left of it. And to this day, when you know how a burnt house smells, to this day when I smell a burnt house, I flash back to that moment. So that's the backstory behind the initial entry story into the novel. One little tidbit here. So I've got a son named Catfish, and when he was about 2.5 or 3, he was like a chimpanzee in the house. And Mom and Dad came up to visit. We lived in New Jersey, and I mentioned to Dad, I told Dad what the boy had been doing and some of the stuff he had done. I said, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And Dad looked at me and said, son, has he burned the house down yet? I said, no, sir. No. And Dad smiled at me and said, I'm one up on you then, aren't I? Y'all have a good day. I hope you'll buy my book if you don't already have it. It's Me, Boo, and the Goob, A Southern Adventure. It's available at my website, williamlgarner.com, or through Barnes & Noble, or just about any bookseller can order it for you. Y'all take care now. Till next time. Bye-bye.
We're killing time.